History remembers emperors, conquerors, and prophets. Yet sometimes the greatest revolution begins in silence, carried not by armies, but by a single mind working in obscurity. And this is the story of a man whose name dissolved into dust while his ideas reshaped continents. In forgotten libraries lit by wavering oil lamps, he traced patterns hidden inside ancient legends, comparing flood myths from civilizations, mapping constellations described in crumbling tablets, and asking questions institutions preferred never to hear. He was not a king, nor a general, nor a celebrated scholar. Yet the calculations he made would alter trajectory of nations, tracing the outlines of lands that did not match the modern world, and he wondered whether ancient cartographers had recorded memories of civilizations swallowed by shifting oceans. He cross-referenced those maps with sediment records, ice core data preserved in early scientific archives, and obscure translations of forbidden texts that described fire from the sky and winters that lasted for generations, slowly forming a theory that climate change had erased entire cultures long before. Recorded history admitted their existence openly, but theories that redraw humanity's timeline are dangerous currency. And as his research expanded, he encountered resistance that felt less like academic skepticism and more like deliberate obstruction. As funding vanished, archives were sealed, and colleagues quietly advised him to pursue safer subjects. He discovered that certain archaeological sites connected to his findings had been declared off-limits by political decree, their excavation halted under vague claims of preservation, while private institutions acquired artifacts that never reached public museums, disappearing instead into climate-controlled vaults where inconvenient evidence could be studied without scrutiny and, if necessary, forgotten by official historians. Despite mounting pressure, he continued weaving connections between ancient legends of gods descending in thunderous chariots and geological records of meteor impacts, proposing that what myth described as divine wrath might have been cosmic catastrophe witnessed by early societies and encoded in story to survive trauma. Using emerging computer models in a modest laboratory, he simulated shifting tectonic plates and rapid glacial melt, demonstrating how coastlines could transform within a few centuries, and suggesting that lost civilizations were not fantasies but casualties of natural forces amplified by climate instability. Their memory preserved only an allegory in scattered ruins worldwide upheaval. As whispers of his conclusions spread beyond academic circles, policymakers grew uneasy, recognizing that acknowledging forgotten collapses caused by environmental neglect might destabilize economies built on fragile assumptions. And so reports were reframed, grants redirected, and media narratives softened to portray his work as speculative curiosity rather than urgent warning. Eventually, his name faded from conferences and journals. Yet the data he released into networks took on a life of its own, inspiring a generation of archaeologists, climate scientists, and technologists who continued the investigation, unaware that they were following a path illuminated by a man history chose not to remember. Years passed, and while his presence diminished from public discourse, the quiet revolution he ignited began to surface in unexpected corners of the world, where young researchers armed with drones, LiDAR scanners, and satellite imaging rediscovered landscapes long believed to be barren, revealing geometric structures beneath dense forests and submerged foundations along continental shelves. They did not initially realize that their inspiration traced back to his early papers on ancient maps and shifting seas. Yet the algorithms guiding their searches mirrored his original calculations, as if his mind had been quietly encoded into the machinery of modern technology, steering exploration toward truths once dismissed as myth. In the rainforests of Central America, LiDAR beams pierced the canopy to expose vast urban networks hidden for centuries, while off the coasts of India and the Mediterranean, sonar mapping revealed symmetrical ruins lying beneath waves, echoing his claim that rising seas had swallowed sophisticated societies. Archaeologists cautiously reframed narratives, acknowledging that civilizations had risen and fallen far earlier and more frequently than textbooks suggested, yet official statements carefully avoided referencing the controversial lineage of thought that had predicted such discoveries, preserving institutional pride while silently absorbing the accuracy of his once marginalized vision. Meanwhile, in climate laboratories analyzing polar ice cores research identified abrupt warming events thousands of years ago, confirming that Earth's climate had shifted with terrifying speed in prehistoric eras, validating his warnings that environmental collapse was not a distant abstraction but a recurring chapter in human existence. His early models, once criticized as alarmist, began to resemble prophetic blueprints, Has contemporary climate change accelerated coastlines, retreat, and destabilized ecosystems? And yet public narratives frame these insights as products of collective progress rather than the culmination of a solitary thinker who had first stitched together myth, archaeology, and geology into one cohesive warning. Political influence tightened as governments grappled with the implications of ancient collapses tied to resource mismanagement and environmental stress, fearing that acknowledging cyclical destruction might undermine confidence in modern systems built on perpetual growth. Archives containing correspondence about his suppressed grants resurfaced through investigative journalists, revealing coordinated efforts to redirect research away from politically inconvenient conclusions. And though no official apology emerged, the pattern of suppression became increasingly difficult to ignore, hinting that history's omissions are sometimes deliberate edits rather than accidental oversights shaped by power and preservation. Yet the most profound transformation unfolded quietly in classrooms and independent research forums, where students questioned linear narratives of progress and embraced a more fragile, cyclical understanding of civilization, unknowingly inheriting his intellectual legacy. Open-source databases preserved fragments of his work, circulating freely beyond institutional control, inspiring interdisciplinary collaboration between technologists, historians, and climate activists who sensed that the past held urgent lessons for the present. Though his name rarely appeared in citations, the architecture of contemporary inquiry bore his fingerprints, subtle yet unmistakable, guiding humanity toward truths that institutions once tried desperately to conceal. In remote deserts, where wind carves patterns across forgotten ruins, a new generation of explorers followed digital trails that led back to fragments of his suppressed manuscripts. And as they reconstructed his lost chapters from archived hard drives and fading photocopies, they uncovered a deeper layer of his vision, one that extended beyond vanished cities and shifting coastlines into the realm of human psychology and power. He had argued that civilizations do not collapse solely because of environmental catastrophe, but because leaders deny warning signs in order to preserve authority, reshaping evidence to maintain control, a pattern he'd traced from ancient empires to modern governments with unsettling precision. Among his recovered notes were translations of obscure tablets discovered decades earlier, texts once labeled mythological fantasies describing celestial omens, famine, and rulers who silenced astronomers predicting disaster. And he had meticulously compared these accounts with political records from later eras, revealing uncanny similarities in rhetoric and suppression. He believed forbidden texts were not mystical relics, but coded historical testimonies compressed through allegory to survive censorship. And he suspected that throughout history, knowledge threatening centralized power had been systematically diluted, reframed, or erased, creating a sanitized timeline that celebrated triumph, while obscuring repeated warnings etched into collective memory. Advanced artificial intelligence systems, trained on vast corpora of global literature, began identifying recurring motifs across cultures that matched his original cross-cultural comparisons, strengthening the argument that ancient legends shared a common root in real environmental upheavals. These algorithms uncovered linguistic echoes linking flood myths in Mesopotamia, the Americas, and Asia, suggesting that collective trauma had left synchronized imprints across continents. And while scholars cautiously debated interpretation, the data reinforced his claim that humanity sold the stories were repositories of empirical observation disguised as myth to ensure survival through turbulent ages of silence. Yet as technological validation mounted, so too did renewed resistance, for acknowledging synchronized global catastrophes implied vulnerabilities that modern infrastructure might still share, and certain policy advisors quietly discouraged public emphasis on historical parallels to contemporary climate instability. Funding once again shifted toward less disruptive research. Conferences subtly excluded panels exploring cyclical collapse, and media coverage favored narratives of innovation detached from historical caution, echoing the very mechanisms of denial he had outlined in his private journals, as if his thesis about power's instinct for preservation was being reenacted in real time before a distracted world. Still, beneath institutional hesitation, grassroots movements embraced the broader implications of his rediscovered work, integrating archaeological findings with climate activism and technological foresight to advocate systemic change. Community-led research initiatives flourished, bypassing traditional gatekeepers through decentralized platforms, and as independent filmmakers, writers, and educators revived his story. Audiences began to sense that the anonymous architect of this intellectual awakening had been deliberately sidelined. Though no monument bore his likeness and no holiday honored his contributions, the quiet alignment of science, myth, and policy reform revealed that his influence persisted, steadily reshaping humanity's understanding of its fragile place within Earth's shifting story. As evidence accumulated across disciplines, the world found itself standing at a crossroads, eerily similar to the civilizations he had resurrected from obscurity, where rising seas, intensifying storms, and destabilized food systems echoed the environmental tremors preserved in ancient allegories. Coastal cities invested in seawalls, while inland regions battled drought, and policymakers publicly championed resilience, while privately reviewing classified projections that mirrored his earliest simulations. Projections once dismissed as speculative, yet now reflected in satellite data streaming in real time. The planet itself seemed to validate his thesis, whispering through melting glaciers and burning forests that history's cycle was not theoretical, but unfolding again. Deep within governmental archives, memoranda surfaced acknowledging that early warnings about rapid climate shifts had been deprioritized for fear of economic disruption, confirming what he had long suspected, that political influence often bends scientific truth into manageable narratives. Analysts quietly admitted that had his integrated model of archaeology and climate science been embraced sooner, infrastructure planning might have shifted decades earlier, potentially softening the blow of accelerating change. Yet public discourse remained cautious, framing present crises as unprecedented anomalies rather than chapters in a recurring saga, because admitting repetition implied accountability extending far beyond any single administration or generation. Meanwhile, archaeological expeditions accelerated with urgency, racing against encroaching waters to document submerged settlements before they vanished again. This time, not into myth, but into digital archives, preserved by scanning technology. Divers filmed stone foundations beneath turquoise waves. LiDAR mapped ancient roadways hidden beneath jungle canopy. And interdisciplinary teams compared these findings with predictive climate models, recognizing patterns that aligned uncannily with his forgotten equations. The synthesis of past and present painted a sobering portrait. Civilizations thriving in stable climates, expanding rapidly, then faltering when environmental thresholds were crossed, often compounded by denial from those entrusted with stewardship. Educational institutions gradually revised curricula, introducing a more nuanced timeline, acknowledging abrupt climatic events and the fragility of societal systems, though rarely attributing this paradigm shift to its quiet originator. Students debated resilience strategies informed by archaeological precedent. Entrepreneurs developed adaptive technologies inspired by ancient water management systems, and urban planners studied collapsed cities as cautionary blueprints. His intellectual architecture had become foundational, embedded so deeply within contemporary thinking that its source seemed almost irrelevant. Yet the absence of recognition underscored the very mechanism of historical erasure he had warned about in his most reflective writings. And so the man who had once labored in obscurity watching patterns emerge across myth's map and molecule found his ultimate vindication not in fame, but in transformation, as humanity slowly recalibrated its understanding of progress and vulnerability. Though his name remained largely unspoken, the shift in collective consciousness bore testimony to his persistence, revealing that influence does not require applause to endure. In the quiet alignment of archaeology, climate, science, and technological foresight, his unseen hand continued guiding decisions, reminding the world that the past is not buried, it is waiting patient and relentless for those willing to listen before the cycle turns again. Night settles over the ruins of forgotten cities, and as waves lap against stones that once framed marketplaces and temples, the silence feels less like absence and more like testimony. As if the earth itself is remembering what humanity tries to forget. In dim archive rooms and glowing server farms, fragments of his work continue circulating through digital veins, embedded in climate algorithms, archaeological databases, and policy simulations that shape decisions affecting millions. He never sought monuments or recognition, yet his synthesis of ancient legends, lost civilizations, shifting climates, and political behavior became an invisible compass guiding a world teetering between repetition and awakening. Scholars now speak cautiously about cyclical collapse and adaptive resilience, framing discussions within safe academic language, yet the core realization remains unchanged. Civilizations are not guaranteed permanence, and environmental neglect paired with political denial, can unravel centuries of achievement within a single generation. His early insistence that myth-encoded empirical memory has inspired a quiet renaissance in interdisciplinary research, where historians collaborate with climatologists and technologists to decode stories once dismissed as fantasy. In this convergence of disciplines, his philosophy lives on, not as doctrine but as method, urging humility before forces larger than any empire. Across coastal megacities, illuminated by restless neon light, engineers redesign infrastructure to withstand rising tides, while legislators debate carbon policies under pressure from citizens increasingly aware of historical precedent. Few realize that the intellectual scaffolding supporting these efforts was drafted decades earlier by a man dismissed as speculative and inconvenient. His predictions about environmental thresholds, once relegated to obscure journals, now echo in international summits and emergency briefings, subtly influencing strategies that aim to prevent tomorrow's ruins from joining the archaeological record, proving that ideas can outlive suppression and operates beneath the surface like tectonic currents shaping continents. Yet the most unsettling aspect of his legacy is not validation but warning, because despite mounting evidence and technological advancement, the same patterns of hesitation and narrative control persist, suggesting that knowledge alone cannot guarantee transformation. He understood that history's greatest obstacle is not ignorance, but willful blindness, the deliberate softening of uncomfortable truths to preserve short-term stability. As media cycles accelerate and attention fragments, the risk of forgetting grows once more, and the cycle he traced through millennia waits patiently, indifferent to whether humanity chooses adaptation or denial in the face of mounting signals. And so the story closes not with applause but with a question, suspended in the dark: if one unrecognized thinker could alter the trajectory of science, archaeology, and climate awareness, without fame or acknowledgement, what other truths lie buried beneath convenience and fear? The ruins beneath the sea, the myths encoded in ancient texts, and the data streaming from orbit all converge into a single, haunting realization. History does not vanish, it echoes, and whether we listen determines whether future generations inherit thriving cities or silent stones beneath rising water, bearing witness to lessons once again ignored.